part A, 8.4, configure front controller. First, let's look at the more properties of front controller. It is a central component of Spring MVC. Here, you have the name. So there, you can see the front controller is called dispatcher servlet. So this name never changes. From the first version of Spring framework through now version 5, so this front controller name never changes. Dispatcher, so you can see it is a servlet. Its name has that servlet name. And actually we configure it as a regular Java servlet. So you can see, because when we configure a Java servlet, we configure it in a web.xml. That's the Java EE configuration file, web.xml. So this configuration file is also configured in the web.xml. All right. So the front controller, every web request accessing Spring framework, every request accessing Spring framework. If not accessing Spring framework, then you do not need to go there. You do not need to use it. Accessing Spring framework must go through it so that it can manage the entire request handling process. In other words, the front controller forces all the requests accessing Spring framework or Spring MVC framework. I'll skip, the MVC, but we mean Spring MVC framework. Forces all those requests, right? Follow the request handling, entire request handling process. Otherwise, something could be wrong. Remember, resources need to be wired, right? Around one particular controller. If you do not go through one of the request handling way, you will mess up. The resources will be messed up. So here, that's one important, reason. All right. Then it is possible that some of the requests do not access the Spring framework. So what's the meaning of that? What's the meaning of this sentence? It is possible. So here, let me give the background. Otherwise, you will get confused. When you look at this sentence, you will get confused. The meaning is, when you develop a Java web applications, so you use the Spring MVC framework to develop it. Okay? So you use, all the Spring MVC features, but you do not have to. Sometimes, suppose you have some special thing, you do not need to use Spring MVC. You can use other technologies. There are other technologies. Then you can easily just use other technologies. You just do not use that front controller. Okay? Front controller is an option. You do not have to use it. You just use, servlet or other technology. Other technology may have their own front controllers. Because front controller is a design pattern. Another different technology can use its own front controller, similar to the Spring MVC way. So For that reason, we have this sentence. Yeah. All right. It dispatches the request to appropriate handlers, typically controllers, for processing. Yeah. Handlers, typically controllers, but there are some other special type of handlers, right? Yeah. And some handler ways, just a simplified version of controllers. Yeah. From the form, it may not look like a controller, but internal implementation is through some controller. Yeah. So basically, controllers as handlers. Yeah. All right. Handlers are configured to connect the resources for a feature. Yeah. We'll talk about this in a previous video. Yeah. Each handler is responsible for resolving its view. Yeah. So at the end of the processing, you need to specify in some way. So there are many different ways to specify a view. Yeah. Now, so we will see after a few examples, we will see how to specify views. Yeah. The Spring class used, yeah. Here I talk about this dispatcher servlet now. The full path Spring class, this one. Okay, yeah. Dispatcher servlet. From first version to the most recent version, this one never changes. Yeah, so this central role component of Spring Framework still sit at the center of the Spring Framework. Yeah, or entry point. Yeah, we can say, entry point, but its role is central. Yeah. All right, next. Framework specific configuration file. Framework specific configuration file. So here, in order to configure, so why we need that, configure request the handlers. In order to configure request the handlers, we need this configuration file. So let's look at that. To configure the application context. Yeah, here there is a terminology called application context. Application, yeah, your web application. Context. So what's the context? Okay? Yeah. It's something like environment, right? So we understand as an environment containing all the resources in that environment. So we understand that kind of context as context. Because people use this term but never give its definition. Never give its definition. Describe it a little bit. Yeah. So based on my understanding, I describe in this way. Yeah. So the environment for your application that contains all the resources for your application. So that's my understanding. Yeah. All right. Default name of the configuration file. Yeah. Your configuration file should have some special name. The default. That means you do not need to specify it. You do not need to tell the Spring Framework what is the name. If you follow the rule, then the Spring MVC Framework will use that name automatically. Yeah. So what is that rule? The rule is joining the servlet name with -servlet.xml. Join servlet. Yeah. Because, so what is the servlet name? Here you may wonder, what is that servlet name? Remember, your front controller is a servlet, right? because we call it dispatcher servlet, right? Dispatcher servlet. So it's a servlet. So you configure it as a servlet. But when you configure it as a servlet, you need to give a name of the servlet, right? Each servlet should have a name, right? Yeah. See, in our example, our servlet name is called hello. Hello is our servlet name. Then you append dash servlet to it, then .xml. So this is the default framework specific configuration file. Here, the reason we say framework specific because it is special for the Spring MVC framework. If you change to a different framework, then you do not use this one. You need to use another different framework specific configuration file. Yeah. So that's the difference. Yeah. All right. Next, location of that special configuration file inside web-inf. Yeah. The same location as the web.xml, right? Web.xml we put in this folder, but that hello-servlet.xml we also put in this folder directly. Yeah. Then Spring MVC, the container, container concept. Container knows to find these configuration files in that location. Yeah. All right. It is loaded automatically when the web application gets started. So so that's the reason we like to use the default name. If you have no reason, just use the default name. But sometimes we need to use non-default name. There are some situations. When you use non-default name, you do not have this automatic thing. You need to tell the container to load your non-default configuration files. Yeah. All right. You can use a non-default name or location for your application context configuration file. You can, if you have some good reason. The reason sometimes we need to use a non-configuration file because we may have many different configuration files. Sometimes we need more than one because we want to organize our resources in different files. All right, yeah. In that situation, only one can be default, right? The remaining non-default. So, but in that case, you need to specify all those non-default configuration files in web.xml. So then the container can find those configuration files and load them into the environment. Yeah. All right. Configuring front controller. Now we want to look at how to configure front controller as a server, right? The front controller, we know it is just a special servlet. Special servlet. It is configured as a usual servlet. And in this location, web.xml. Then, first, remember we need this servlet class file for that servlet. Each servlet, you need to give a name. Here we use hello name. So that's the reason the default configuration file name hello-servlet.xml. That name comes from this servlet name, hello here. Yeah. All right. Then the URL pattern here. Yeah. Hello. You connect the servlet name to a URL pattern. Here we use this star. So matching everything star.htm. This is the old way. This is all the way people use for controller .htm. Yeah, because at that time, people just try to fake it, make a controller look like an HTML file, right? But it try to separate from a regular HTML file, it just use HTML. So that is, old Spring MVC used this way. Yeah. But the new version, this way is not good for the newer version. Yeah. For newer version, the mapping way will be different. Very different. Yeah. But for the new way, you need more background to understand the new way. So here I just tell you the new way. Extension type. Yeah. Here we do not use this extension type or things like this. We use the path type. We change from extension type to path type. Path, okay? Something slash something, slash, right? So that's look like a path. Yeah. So you will see this pathway supports more functionalities. You can do a lot more in this way. In the old way, you cannot do much. You cannot do much. Okay? Yeah. Very limited. Very limited. And the new way, the path type, very powerful. Very, very powerful. So later we will spend a lot of time to learn this path type URL pattern. Yeah. All right, so we finish the whole part for module 2, part A. Yeah.